On the 4th of July, with 78 guests seated under imported silk lanterns, my sister spent $52,300 on a rehearsal dinner she called intimate. She spent exactly $0 on a chair for me. If you've ever been erased in a room where you helped build everything, stay with me. Like the video if this hits close, and tell me your local time in the comments. I read every one. There's something I need you to see before the end of this. I stood at the edge of the dining room while a harpist played something soft and forgettable, the kind of music meant to make people feel important. Crystal glasses caught the light, silverware lined up like soldiers, 60 place settings, each with a name written in gold calligraphy. Not one said mine. My name is Lila Moreno. I'm 24 years old, and in less than 24 hours, in front of 180 wedding guests, the Carrington family would learn what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. But I didn't always know how to be quiet. 16 years earlier, on a rainy afternoon in Sonoma County, California, my mother signed a set of papers she didn't fully understand. I didn't know that then. I was 8, sitting on the kitchen floor with a coloring book, listening to adult voices through a half-closed door. My mother, Elena Moreno, spoke softly, always soft, even when she should have raised her voice. Across from her sat Richard Carrington, my stepfather, real estate developer, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth and calculated with his eyes. He said words like partnership, protection, long-term stability. My mother nodded. I remember the pens scratching against paper. I remember the smell of coffee going cold on the counter. I remember the way my older sister, Vanessa Carrington, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching like she already understood the outcome. I didn't. 3 months later, my mother was gone. Not an accident, not sudden, just a quiet illness that moved faster than anyone expected. At least, that's what they told me. The funeral had white roses and catered food, and people who spoke in low, careful voices. Richard stood at the front, hand on my shoulder, telling everyone he would take care of us. Us. But us never really included me. Vanessa was 11 then, blonde, poised, already practicing the kind of smile that made adults lean in and listen. She moved into the master bedroom within a year, said it made more sense. I moved into the guest room at the end of the hall. Temporary, they said. Temporary turned into permanent so slowly I didn't notice until I was 15 and still sleeping under someone else's floral wallpaper. By then, the pattern was clear. Vanessa got private school tuition. I got hand-me-down textbooks. Vanessa got a car at 16, a white BMW, leased in Richard's name. I got permission to use the old pickup when it didn't need repairs. Vanessa hosted brunches. I cleaned up after them, and the house, the vineyard, the land everyone called Carrington Estates grew. I helped grow it. By 17, I was managing inventory. By 18, I was handling vendor contracts. By 20, I was balancing accounts Richard never bothered to check. He liked to call me capable. He never called me family. One night, when I was 21, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. Richard in his office, door slightly open, voice low. She has no idea what she signed. A pause. No, the trust is locked. Everything's in Vanessa's name now. I stood in the hallway, heart steady in a way that surprised me. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough. The next morning, I started looking. Quietly. Bank statements first, then property records, then old documents buried in filing cabinets Richard assumed no one else would touch. It took me 14 months to piece together the first layer. My mother hadn't just signed paperwork. She had transferred ownership of the vineyard, the main house, and 86 acres of land into a trust. A trust controlled by Richard, with Vanessa as the primary beneficiary. My name wasn't on it, not even as a contingency. I remember sitting on the floor of my room, documents spread around me, the late afternoon sun cutting through the blinds. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not anger, clarity. There's a difference. Anger makes noise. Clarity makes plans. So I stopped reacting. I smiled at dinner. I worked harder. I made myself useful in ways that made Richard comfortable. Invisible, but necessary. That's the safest place to gather information. By 23, I had the second layer. Paper trails, transfers, numbers that didn't line up. Over $610,000 moved through accounts labeled operational expenses. Money that should have been reinvested into the vineyard. Money that disappeared. And then I found the third thing, the thing that made everything else make sense. A document dated 9 months after my mother died. Her signature, on a revision to the trust. There was just one problem. I had a copy of her original signature from a notarized medical directive. They didn't match. Not even close. That's when I stopped wondering if something was wrong, and started proving it. 18 months. That's how long I spent building something no one could argue with. 18 months of early mornings and late nights. Of pretending not to hear the jokes. Of pretending not to care when Vanessa introduced me as the help to her friends. Because timing matters more than truth. Truth without timing is just noise. And I wasn't interested in noise. I was interested in impact. Which brings us back to the rehearsal dinner. 60 seats, gold calligraphy, imported peonies flown in from France. A string quartet tucked into the corner like background decoration. Vanessa sat at the head of the room, elevated slightly above everyone else. Custom chair, of course. Her fiancé, Daniel Whitaker, sat beside her. Investment banker, East Coast Polish. The kind of man who checks his reflection in every glass surface. Richard moved between tables, shaking hands, laughing too loud. Building something, he liked to say. I watched him from the doorway. You ever notice how people who build things with stolen foundations always stand a little too straight, like they're compensating for something underneath? I walked along the tables slowly, scanning the name cards. Whitaker family, Carrington partners, investors, friends, strangers. No Lila Moreno. I stopped at the head table. There's no seat for me. Vanessa didn't look surprised. She smiled, not warm, sharp. We prioritized important guests tonight. A few people laughed, not loudly, just enough. Richard didn't even stand. Don't start anything, Lila. That was it. That was the entire defense. 16 years of my life reduced to, don't start anything. So I didn't. I smiled. Of course, I'll just step outside for a minute. I walked through the room, past the candles, past the music, past the people who never once asked where I fit. Out into the parking lot. The air was warm, dry, smelled like dust and expensive perfume. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and dialed the one number I'd been saving. He answered on the second ring. Everything's ready, I said. A pause. You're sure about the timing? I looked back through the window, Vanessa raising her glass. To family. I smiled. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., during the reception. Another pause. That'll be very public. Good. I hung up. 15 years they'd been building a life on something that wasn't theirs. 18 months, I've been quietly taking it back. And tomorrow, in front of everyone who thought they knew the Carrington name, the truth was going to walk in uninvited. Here's what I want to know. If you were in my place right now, would you have stayed silent for 18 months? Or would you have exposed them the moment you found out? Type wait or expose in the comments. Because tomorrow, someone was going to wish I had chosen differently, and it wasn't going to be me. The morning of the wedding, at exactly 9:10 a.m., Vanessa's makeup artist charged $1,200 to perfect a face that had never once apologized. At 9:17, I was scrubbing dirt off my hands in the vineyard because no one had assigned me a role worth paying for. If you've ever been useful but never valued, you already know how this feels. Before we go further, hit like if you've ever had to prove your worth in silence. And tell me this, would you still show up today if you knew what I knew? I woke up at 5:30, not because anyone asked me to, because habits don't disappear just because your life changes. The vineyard was quiet that early, rows of grapevines stretching into the fog, the kind of calm that makes people believe everything is in order. It wasn't. I walked the perimeter like I had 1,000 times before, checking irrigation lines, noting which sections needed attention. This land had taught me patience. It had also taught me something else. If you want something to grow, you have to know exactly where the rot is. Inside the house, the wedding machine was already running. Hair tools humming, voices layered over each other, Vanessa's laugh cutting through everything like glass. I stepped into the kitchen. No one looked up. There was a breakfast spread laid out. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee in silver carafes. I poured myself a cup. Cold. No one had bothered to refill it. Diane, Vanessa's event planner, brushed past me with a clipboard. "Lila, can you make yourself useful and check the delivery on the floral arch?" No good morning. No please. Just useful. Always useful. I nodded. Of course. That's the thing about playing the long game. You don't resist small things. You let them underestimate you. Outside, trucks were already lining the driveway. Florists unloading white roses, rental crews setting up chairs, caterers moving like a coordinated army. I checked the arch. Perfect. Of course it was. Everything today was designed to look perfect. That's what made what I was about to do so effective. I pulled out my phone. A message from Ethan Clark. On schedule. Documents finalized. Server confirmed. Ethan Clark. That's the name I hadn't said out loud yet. Estate litigation attorney. 38. Precise. Careful. And very interested in what happens when forged documents meet a courtroom. I met him 18 months ago, the day after I found the second signature. I remember sitting across from him in his office, sliding the papers across the desk. He didn't react immediately. That's how I knew he was good. He read everything twice. Then he leaned back and said one sentence I'll never forget. "If this is what I think it is, they didn't just take your inheritance. They committed fraud." That was the moment the story changed. Not emotionally, legally. And legal truth moves differently. Slower, heavier, harder to ignore. Back in the present, I typed one word. Ready. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then came the reply. See you at 2. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Across the lawn, Vanessa stepped out of the house. Wedding dress. Custom, of course. Long train. Hand-sewn lace. The kind of dress that says nothing bad has ever happened to you. People gathered around her immediately. Gasps, compliments, phones raised. She turned slowly, letting everyone see. Performance. Always performance. Her eyes found me across the lawn, just for a second. And there it was again. That look. Not hatred. Worse. Dismissal. Like I was background. Like I would always be background. Let me tell you something. The most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone thinks doesn't matter. By 11:45, the guests started arriving. Black cars pulling in, men in tailored suits, women in pastel dresses and wide hats. Money has a look. You recognize it after a while. Confidence without curiosity. I stood near the back, not hidden, just not invited into the center. Exactly where I needed to be. The ceremony started at noon. Music floated through the vineyard. Vanessa walked down the aisle on Richard's arm. He looked proud. Not emotional. Proud. Like this was a deal closing. Like everything had gone according to plan. I watched them pass. Didn't move. Didn't react. Ethan once told me something during one of our meetings. The strongest position in any conflict is knowing you don't need to interrupt, because the truth will do it for you. The vows were predictable, carefully written, practiced. Vanessa's voice softened at the right moments. Daniel's tone, steady, controlled. They kissed. Applause. Champagne opened. Music shifted. Just like that, the ceremony ended, and the real event began, the reception. Tables filled, servers moved between guests. Laughter grew louder. Alcohol always speeds things up. I checked my phone. 1:22 p.m., 38 minutes. Richard took the microphone first. Of course he did. He always liked to frame the narrative. Welcome, everyone. Today is about family, about legacy, about building something that lasts. Legacy. That word again. He used it like he owned it, like he hadn't rewritten it. Vanessa watched him, smiling. Daniel nodded along. The Whitaker family looked pleased. Everything was working. Everything was clean. Everything was wrong. Then came the announcement. Daniel stepped forward. We're excited to share something special with all of you today. A screen lowered behind him. A presentation, of course. Slide 1. Carrington Estates Expansion Project. My stomach didn't drop. I'd already seen it. Golf villas, event spaces, a private members club. The vineyard transformed into something unrecognizable. Projected revenue. $12 million in the first 3 years. Applause. People love numbers when they're big enough. Daniel continued. This land has been in the Carrington family for years, and we're proud to take it to the next level. There it was, the lie. Clean, confident, public. I looked around the room. No one questioned it. Why would they? Confidence is convincing. But truth doesn't need confidence. It just needs timing. A man at one of the front tables raised his hand. Older, sharp eyes. I recognized him. Walter Hayes, County Planning Board. Wasn't this originally Moreno property? The room shifted, just slightly. Richard didn't hesitate. Elena trusted us to carry it forward. Trusted. Another word he liked. I checked my phone again. 1:58 p.m. 2 minutes. My pulse stayed steady. That's the thing about preparing for something this long. By the time it happens, you're already calm. I stood up, chair scraping softly against the ground. Not loud, just enough. A few heads turned. I walked forward. Slow, measured. Every step intentional. I stopped just short of the stage. Excuse me, Daniel paused. Richard looked at me, annoyed, controlled. Not yet afraid. Not yet. There's someone outside who needs to speak with you about this property. A beat. Then another. That was the moment. The exact moment the story cracked. Richard's smile tightened. Now is not the time, Lila. I tilted my head slightly. Actually, it is. The doors behind the reception area opened, and the man who walked in didn't belong to their world. Gray suit, black folder. No hesitation, no performance, just purpose. He walked straight toward the stage, and for the first time that day, for the first time in years, Richard Carrington didn't speak. He just watched. And I realized something in that moment. He already knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to understand. This wasn't going away. The man stopped in front of him, opened the folder, and said 5 words that changed everything. But before I tell you exactly what he said, I need you to think about this. If someone built their entire life on something that was never theirs, do they deserve a warning? Or do they deserve a moment like this? Because what happened next didn't just ruin a wedding, it exposed something much bigger, and Richard wasn't ready for it. At exactly 2:03 p.m., with 182 guests holding champagne glasses midair, the man in the gray suit said 5 words that turned celebration into silence. You've been served, Mr. Carrington. If you've ever waited for the right moment to speak and then watched the room freeze when you finally did, stay with me. And tell me this, would you have said it earlier, or would you have waited until it mattered most? The words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy, precise, final. The music stopped without anyone asking. The violinist lowered her bow mid-note. A server froze beside table 6, bottle tilted, champagne spilling quietly over the rim of a glass no one was holding anymore. Richard didn't take the envelope right away. That told me everything. Men like him react fast when they're in control. They hesitate when they're not. "Who are you?" His voice was steady, too steady. "Process server, Superior Court of California." The envelope stayed extended between them. A small rectangle of paper that suddenly mattered more than every dollar spent on that wedding. "Take it, Richard," someone muttered from the front row. He took it, slowly, like it might burn. Vanessa stepped closer, her dress brushing across the floor like nothing had changed. "Daddy, what is that?" He didn't answer her. He opened the envelope. I watched his face. That's something you learn when you've lived around people like him. You don't listen first. You watch. The shift started at his eyes. A flicker. Then a tightening in his jaw. Then color draining, not all at once, but in stages. Control slipping. Not gone, but slipping. "This is a mistake." He said it quickly, too quickly. The first stage, denial. The room started whispering, soft at first, then louder, like wind picking up before a storm. Daniel stepped away from Vanessa without realizing he'd done it. Just one step, distance, instinct. The man in the gray suit spoke again. "Temporary restraining order. Immediate suspension of any sale, development, or transfer of Carrington Estates pending investigation into trust fraud and unlawful asset control." Every word landed harder than the last. Fraud, asset control, investigation. Those aren't social words. Those are legal words. And legal words don't disappear when the music starts again. Vanessa turned to Richard, panic cutting through her voice now. What is he talking about? Richard folded the papers like he could reduce their importance by making them smaller. "This is a competitor trying to interfere. It's nothing. We'll handle it Monday." Stage 2. Deflection. Blame someone else. Make it external. Make it temporary. It almost worked. Almost. Because people want to believe things are simple. But then Daniel's father stood up. George Whitaker. Old money. Sharp instincts. "Nothing about this is nothing." Richard silence again. Different this time. He walked toward the stage slowly, measured. The way people move when they're already calculating losses. Daniel followed him. Vanessa didn't. She stayed exactly where she was, center stage, still trying to hold the moment together. Like if she didn't move, reality wouldn't either. I stepped forward. Just one step, and suddenly, every eye in that room found me. You ever feel a shift like that? Like a room recalibrates around you? That was the moment I stopped being background and became the problem. Or the answer, depending on who you asked. Richard finally looked at me. Not through me, at me. "What did you do?" His voice dropped. Low, controlled, dangerous. I met his eyes. I told the truth. He let out a short laugh, sharp, empty. "You don't even know what you're talking about." I tilted my head slightly. "Then let's have someone explain it." Right on cue, another voice cut through the room. Calm, clear, unrushed. That would be me. Ethan Clark stepped forward. Dark suit, no tie, briefcase in hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority doesn't shout. It states. "My name is Ethan Clark. I represent Lila Moreno, the legal beneficiary of the Moreno Family Trust." The room shifted again, not whispers now. Attention, full, focused. Vanessa blinked, once, twice. What trust? There it was, stage 2 cracking. Ethan set his briefcase on the nearest table, opened it, pulled out a set of documents, neatly organized. Of course, the Moreno Family Trust, established in 2008 by Elena Moreno. My mother's name, spoken clearly, in front of everyone. Something in my chest tightened. Not pain, recognition. Ethan continued. Irrevocable. Sole beneficiary, Lila Moreno. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The words did the work. Vanessa shook her head. That's not true. That's not what we were told. Told. Interesting word. Richard stepped forward. This is fabricated. Completely fabricated. Stage 1 again, denial, but weaker this time, because now there was structure, documents, names, details. Ethan didn't react. He placed the first document on the table, the original trust agreement, signed, notarized, filed. Then the second, an amendment, dated 9 months after Elena Moreno's death. A ripple moved through the room. Even people who didn't understand law understood that. Dead people don't sign things. Ethan's voice stayed even. This amendment carries a signature attributed to Elena Moreno. He paused, just long enough for the room to lean in. Forensic analysis confirms that signature was not written by Elena Moreno. There it was. Layer 2. Evidence. Real. Verifiable. Irrefutable. The word forged wasn't even necessary. Everyone heard it anyway. Vanessa took a step back. Her hand found the edge of the table. This is insane, her voice cracked. First time all day. Insane doesn't come with documentation, Ethan said it quietly. And that's when the room fully turned, because calm confidence beats loud denial every time. George Whitaker spoke again. Richard. His tone had changed. No warmth, no partnership, just assessment. You told us everything was clean. Richard didn't answer. For the first time in my life, he didn't have something ready. Vanessa looked at me, really looked. Not dismissal, not annoyance. Recognition. And something else. Fear. You planned this. Not a question, a realization. I held her gaze. 18 months. She blinked, like she was trying to process time differently now, like she suddenly understood. This didn't start today. This didn't start at the rehearsal dinner. This started long before she noticed me. Around us, people were already pulling out phones. Quietly, discreetly. But they were doing it, because moments like this spread. Fast. Faster than reputation can recover. Richard straightened. Last attempt. Final push. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a misunderstanding. We will resolve this legally. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. Stage 3. Trying to form. Control the narrative. Reclaim the room. But something was missing. Belief. No one clapped. No one moved. Because once doubt enters a room, it doesn't leave politely. Ethan closed his briefcase. This will proceed in court, but as of now, no development or financial activity related to this property is permitted. Final. Clean. Unavoidable. Daniel reached up slowly and removed his wedding ring. He didn't make a scene. He just set it on the table, soft, deliberate. Vanessa saw it, and that was the moment she broke. Not when the documents came out, not when the word fraud hit the air, but when the future she thought she secured slipped away without noise. You ruined everything. She said it to me, but her voice, it didn't have anger anymore, just collapse. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice, didn't step closer. Everything was already happening. This wasn't destruction. This was exposure. There's a difference. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace or telling the truth, you already know which one costs more. But here's the part no one in that room understood yet. This wasn't the full story, not even close. Because documents can prove fraud, but they don't explain motive. And what I had, hidden carefully for 18 months, was something that would do more than take the vineyard back. It would explain exactly why Richard Carrington risked everything to keep it. And when that truth came out, no one in that family was going to walk away untouched. So let me ask you this. If you uncover the truth, do you stop when you've proven enough? Or do you keep going until everything is exposed? Because what I did next changed more than just my life. At 2:11 p.m., while half the guests were still standing and the other half were already reaching for their phones, my sister's $52,300 wedding reception began to collapse in complete silence. No screaming, no dramatic exits, just people realizing, one by one, they had been sitting inside a lie. If you've ever watched a perfect moment unravel slowly instead of exploding, you know it hits harder. Stay with me, and tell me this. When everything starts falling apart, do you fight to hold it together? Or do you step back and let it fall? The first people to leave were not the loud ones. They were the careful ones. Investors, business partners, people who understood risk. They didn't argue. They didn't ask questions. They just stood, adjusted their jackets, and walked out with polite nods that meant nothing. That's how real damage starts. Quiet exits. George Whitaker didn't leave. Not yet. He stood near the stage, looking at Richard like he was recalculating a deal in real time. Daniel stood beside him, but there was distance now, not physical, strategic. Vanessa was still on the platform, still in her dress, still trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. Everyone just needs to calm down. Her voice was louder now, sharpened. This is still my wedding. No one answered, because the truth doesn't argue with denial. It waits. Richard finally moved. He stepped forward, grabbed the microphone again. His hand was steady, but not like before. Now it looked practiced, forced. We're going to take a short break. Please enjoy the refreshments while we sort out this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. He was still trying to shrink it, make it manageable, make it something that could be explained away over drinks. But then something small happened, and it changed everything. A woman near the front table spoke, not loudly, but clearly. Did he say forgery? That word, finally spoken out loud. It spread faster than anything else had. Forgery. Not misunderstanding, not confusion. Forgery. You could feel the room shift again, heavier this time, more permanent. Vanessa stepped down from the platform. Her dress caught slightly on the edge. She didn't notice. She walked straight toward me. People moved out of her way. Instinct. Always instinct. You did this. Her voice was low now. Dangerous in a different way. Not loud, not emotional. Focused. I didn't move. You did this to yourself. She shook her head. You think this gives you everything? Everything. Interesting word, because she still didn't understand. This was never about everything. This was about what was mine. You never had it to begin with. I said it calmly, no emphasis, no drama. That's what made it land. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Because deep down, she knew, or at least, she was starting to. Behind her, Richard was already shifting strategies. I watched him step away from the crowd, phone in hand, dialing. Lawyers. Of course. That's what men like him do. They don't fix problems. They escalate them into something they think they can control. Ethan leaned slightly toward me. Quiet. They're going to push back hard now. I nodded. I expected that. He glanced at Richard. They'll question everything. The trust, the timeline, even your mother. There it was, the next layer. And it hit differently. Not fear, but something colder. Of course they would. That's what people do when evidence corners them. They attack the source. And my mother was the source. Across the room, Daniel finally spoke. Vanessa. She turned. Hope flickered across her face. Just for a second. Yes. He didn't step closer. He didn't soften. We need to pause everything. Everything. That word again. This time it meant something else. She shook her head. No, No, we don't. This is temporary. It'll be fixed. He looked at her. And in that moment, you could see it. The shift. Not love, not support. Evaluation. Like he was deciding whether she was still worth the investment. My family's legal team needs clarity before we proceed. Proceed. Not continue. Proceed. Language matters. Vanessa's voice cracked again. You're seriously doing this right now? I'm being careful. That was it. That was the line. Careful. Careful. People don't marry into risk. They walk away from it. George Whitaker placed a hand on his son's shoulder. We're leaving. No announcement, no explanation, just decision. They turned and walked out. Just like that. The future Vanessa had been building left the room without looking back. If you've ever had someone walk away at the exact moment you needed them most, you know that silence, that space they leave behind. It's louder than anything else. Vanessa stood frozen, her hands slightly raised, like she didn't know what to do with them anymore. Then she turned back to me, and this time, there was no performance left. You took everything from me. There it was. Stage 3. Victim. I held her gaze. No, I took back what was mine. She laughed, short, broken. You think that matters now? I didn't answer immediately, because sometimes silence is the answer. Then I said one sentence. Clear, simple, sharp truth. Doesn't care about timing. It just waits until you're exposed. That was the first of 3 things I'd been holding back. The first truth, but not the last. Around us, the room continued to empty. The band packed up quietly. Caterers stopped serving. Half the tables were untouched. $52,300, and no one was eating. That's what happens when appetite meets reality. Richard came back. Faster now. More aggressive. Enough of this. His voice cut through the room. This ends now. He pointed at Ethan. You'll be hearing from my attorneys. Ethan didn't react. I expect we will. Calm, unmoved. That's what frustrated Richard the most. He turned to me, and for the first time, there was no performance, no control, just anger. You have no idea what you're doing. I met his gaze. I know exactly what I'm doing. He stepped closer, lowered his voice. Whatever you think you found, it won't hold. There it was. Not denial, not deflection. A hint of something else. Confidence. And that caught my attention. Because people who are cornered don't sound confident, unless they believe they still have something left. Something I hadn't seen yet. And that's when I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Because if Richard still believed he could win, then there was another layer, another piece, something buried deeper than forged signatures and missing money. And I hadn't uncovered it yet. Ethan must have seen it too. He leaned in slightly. We need to review everything again. I nodded, because suddenly, this wasn't just about proving what he did. It was about understanding why he wasn't afraid. And people like Richard, they don't stay calm unless they think they have leverage. So let me ask you this. If the person you just exposed still believes they can walk away clean, what does that tell you? Because whatever Richard Carrington was hiding, it was big enough to make him stand there in the middle of a ruined wedding and still believe he hadn't lost yet. And that was the first time I felt something close to uncertainty. Not doubt, just awareness that the game was bigger than I thought. At 6:40 p.m., 4 hours after the reception collapsed, Richard Carrington was still making calls while the last of the rented glassware was being packed into crates behind him. The bill for the wedding still stood at $52,300. The value of what was about to surface next couldn't be measured that way. If you've ever thought the worst part was already over, only to realize you were just at the surface, stay with me and answer this honestly. When someone still looks confident after being exposed, do you assume they're bluffing? Or do you start looking for what you missed? By the time the sun started dropping behind the vineyard, the place looked nothing like it had that morning. Half the chairs were gone. The floral arch had been dismantled. White roses lay discarded in plastic bins, like something that had expired. That's what truth does. It turns luxury into waste in a matter of hours. I stood near the fence line, watching the cleanup. Ethan was on the phone a few feet away, pacing slowly, voice low but precise. Yes, we'll need a full injunction extension, and I want financial subpoenas prepared tonight. Subpoenas. That word again. Heavy. I leaned against the wooden post. For the first time all day, there was no noise around me. No music, no voices. Just wind moving through the vines, and my thoughts catching up. Because something didn't sit right. Not the exposure, not the documents. Richard's reaction. That confidence. That refusal to collapse. It didn't match the situation. Unless he knew something we didn't. Ethan ended the call and looked at me. You're thinking the same thing I am. I nodded. He's not acting like someone who just lost everything. Ethan exhaled slowly. Because he doesn't think he has. There it was, the sentence that shifted everything, again. So what are we missing? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked back toward the main house. Lights on, shadows moving inside. Richard, still working, still active. Then he said something that tightened everything in my chest. We've been focused on the trust. I frowned slightly, because that was the case. That was the center of everything. Weren't we supposed to be, yes? He paused. But what if the trust isn't the only thing? Silence. That kind of silence where your brain starts connecting things faster than you can process them. I straightened. What are you saying? I'm saying. He looked at me directly now. What if the vineyard was never the real asset? That landed harder than anything else that day. Because for 18 months, this land had been the entire fight. The history, the betrayal, the proof, everything. If it wasn't the real target, then what was? I pushed off the fence. Show me. We went inside. The house felt different now. Not grand, not controlled, just exposed. Like a stage after the audience leaves. Ethan moved straight to the study. Of course, that's where everything always started. Files, drawers, records. The room was unlocked. That told me something too. Richard wasn't hiding anymore. Or he didn't think he needed to. Esta started pulling documents. Not randomly. Systematically. Property maps, tax records, development proposals. I watched. Then I saw it. A folder I hadn't opened before. Because it didn't look important. Wrong label. Infrastructure review. I picked it up, opened it, and everything shifted. Maps, not of the vineyard, of what was underneath it. I felt my stomach tighten. Ethan. He came over, looked down, and went still. Mineral surveys, water rights, underground mapping, and then the number. Estimated commercial value, $18.7 million. I didn't speak for a few seconds, because suddenly, everything made sense. This was never about grapes, never about wine, never about the vineyard. It was about what was under it. Richard didn't just steal land. He stole access to something worth almost $20 million. Ethan spoke quietly. This changes everything. I nodded slowly. No. This explains everything. The forged signature, the urgency, the confidence, all of it. Vanessa wasn't building a wedding. Richard was building an exit. Sell the land, develop it, cash out, before anyone questioned ownership. And I had just stopped that. Which meant he wasn't just defending himself now, he was protecting something much bigger. I flipped another page. More data, extraction rights, preliminary agreements. And then I saw a name. Not Carrington, not Whitaker. Another company. Hidden, buried in the paperwork. Ethan saw it too. Off-record partner, he muttered. I looked at him. You mean? He nodded. He wasn't acting alone. That realization hit differently because it expanded everything. This wasn't just family betrayal anymore. This was business. Calculated, layered, protected. Which meant one thing. This fight was about to get bigger. Behind us, a voice cut through the room. "You shouldn't be in here." We turned. Richard stood in the doorway. No suit jacket now. Tie gone, sleeves rolled. He looked different. Less polished. More real. But not weaker. Not even close. I held the folder in my hand. "You want to explain this?" He didn't look surprised. Not even a little. Instead, he smiled. Small. Controlled. "So you finally found it." That sentence, that tone, that confirmation, sent a chill through me, because it meant one thing. He hadn't been hoping we wouldn't find it. He'd been waiting. "You knew I'd get here," I said. "Of course." He stepped into the room slowly. "You're smarter than they ever gave you credit for." They, not we. Interesting. Ethan moved slightly closer to me. Positioning. Always positioning. "This changes your situation," Ethan said. Richard shrugged. "Or it complicates yours." There it was again, that confidence. But now I understood it. He wasn't just defending a lie. He was protecting a much bigger deal. And I had just stepped directly into it. "You forged my mother's signature for this," I said. He didn't deny it. Not directly. He just tilted his head. "Your mother didn't understand what she had. Cold, calculated, and completely honest." That's when I realized something else. He didn't regret it. Not even a little. If you were in my position right now, standing in that room, knowing the person in front of you stole everything and still believed he was right, what would you do? Because in that moment, this stopped being about exposure and became something else entirely. Control. And Richard Carrington wasn't ready to give that up. Not without a fight. But here's the part that changed everything again. Because buried in that folder was one more document. One I hadn't fully read yet. One that didn't just prove what he did. It connected him to someone much more powerful. And when that name came out, this wasn't going to stay inside a vineyard. It was going to explode far beyond it. At 7:18 p.m., under a single desk lamp in Richard Carrington's study, I turned a page that connected him to a deal worth $18.7 million. By 7:20, I realized he wasn't afraid of losing the vineyard, because he had already secured something far more dangerous. If you've ever uncovered a truth that made everything before it look small, you know the feeling. Stay with me, and tell me this. When the person you're fighting isn't just greedy, but strategic, do you push harder, or do you step back and rethink everything? The room felt smaller, not physically, but mentally, like the walls had closed in around a reality I hadn't fully understood until now. I held the document in my hand. Thicker paper, different formatting, not something pulled from local records. Corporate, legal, layered. Ethan stepped beside me, read it out loud. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. I scanned the page. Joint exploratory agreement between Carrington Development Group and Redwood Basin Holdings. I stopped. That name. It didn't belong here. Not locally, not small. Redwood Basin Holdings wasn't a vineyard investor. It was a land acquisition firm. Aggressive, quiet. The kind of company that doesn't show up unless something big is underneath the surface. Ethan exhaled slowly. That's not good. I kept reading. Preliminary rights granted for mineral extraction, pending zoning approval, and full ownership verification. Ownership verification. That's where I came in. That's why this hadn't been executed yet. Richard needed clean ownership. He needed the trust erased. He needed me irrelevant. And I had just destroyed that timeline. I lowered the paper. How far along is this? Richard leaned casually against the edge of his desk. Closer now, more open. Because the mask was gone. Now he was just a man explaining a deal. Far enough, he said. His tone almost conversational. You were supposed to stay quiet a little longer. There it was. Not anger, not panic. Annoyance. Like I had interrupted a process. You forged legal documents, I said. He shrugged. I accelerated an outcome. That sentence. That kind of thinking. That's what separates people like him from everyone else. They don't see lines. They see obstacles. Ethan stepped forward slightly. Redwood Basin doesn't partner without due diligence. They knew ownership wasn't clean. Richard smiled faintly. They knew it would be. Future tense. Confidence again. Because in his mind, he had already won. Or at least, he thought he had enough leverage to still win. I flipped to the last page, and that's where I saw it. Signature lines. One filled, Richard Carrington. The other, blank. Redwood Basin Holdings, not signed yet. Which meant one thing. This deal wasn't finalized. Relief flickered. Small, temporary, but real. Then I saw the clause below. Exclusivity period, 24 months. Competing claims must be resolved prior to execution. My chest tightened. Ethan saw it too. He spoke quietly. You're not just blocking him. You're delaying a multi-million-dollar contract. I nodded slowly. And that was the problem. Because delaying something like that doesn't just create frustration. It creates pressure from people far more powerful than Richard. I looked back at him. They're going to come after this. Not a question, a statement. Richard didn't deny it. They already are. That landed heavier than anything else. Because now, this wasn't just about him. This was about everyone connected to that deal, and I had just put myself directly in their path. You dragged me into this, I said. He shook his head. No. His eyes locked onto mine. You stepped into it. Cold, precise, and technically true, because I had chosen to keep going, chosen to dig deeper, chosen to expose everything. And now, everything was exposing me right back. Ethan's voice cut in. The restraining order holds. They can't move forward. Richard laughed softly. You still think this is about timing? Ethan didn't respond. That silence said enough, because we both knew legal timelines don't always match real-world pressure. I stepped closer. What happens when they don't get what they want? Richard's expression didn't change. They adjust. That was the most honest answer he'd given all day. Adjust. Not stop, not walk away. Adjust. Which meant one thing. This wasn't over. It was evolving. Behind me, I heard movement. I turned. Vanessa stood in the doorway. Dress wrinkled now, makeup smudged. Nothing perfect left. She looked between us, at the papers, at Richard, at me. What is this? Her voice was quieter now, not sharp, not controlled, just lost. No one answered immediately, because how do you explain something like this? In one sentence, you can't. I held up the document slightly. This is what your wedding was really about. She stared at it, then at Richard, then back at me. No, her voice shook. No, it wasn't. It wasn't supposed to be. That sentence told me everything. She didn't know. Not fully. She was part of the lie, but not the architect. Richard didn't look at her because she wasn't part of the conversation anymore. Not at this level. Vanessa stepped forward. You used me for this. There it was. Her moment. Not anger, not performance. Realization. Richard finally glanced at her. I built a future for you. She shook her head. No. Tears now. Actual tears. You built something for yourself and dressed it up like it was for me. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. That was the first crack in her world. The real one. Not social embarrassment. Not a broken wedding. Truth. And truth doesn't leave room for illusion. She turned to me. You knew. I held her gaze. Not everything, but enough. Her voice dropped. Why didn't you tell me? There it was. The question people always ask. Too late. I answered honestly. Because you wouldn't have believed me. She didn't argue. Because she knew. She wouldn't have. Ethan closed the folder. We need to go. His tone shifted, more urgent now. Not panic, but awareness of what this had just become. I nodded, because staying here was no longer strategic. It was dangerous. I looked at Richard one last time. This isn't over. He smiled slightly. No, it isn't. But the way he said it, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a promise. And that stayed with me. As we walked out of the house, into the darkening vineyard, the air cooler now, heavier, like something had shifted permanently. Ethan unlocked the car. Before we get in, he said, we need to make a decision. I looked at him. What kind of decision? He met my eyes. Do we stop here, or do we keep going? That question. It mattered more than anything else, because up until now, this had been about reclaiming what was mine. But now, it was bigger, riskier, more complicated. And continuing would mean stepping into something far beyond family. So I'm asking you, if you were me, standing there in the dark, knowing what I now knew, would you stop and protect what you've already won? Or would you keep going and risk everything to expose the rest? Because the next step I took didn't just change the outcome, it changed who I had to become to finish it. At 11:52 p.m., with the vineyard completely dark and the last rental truck gone, I sat in my car outside Carrington Estates, holding a document worth $18.7 million, and made the decision not to move. Not forward, not backward, just still. If you've ever realized that the most dangerous move is the next one, you know this feeling. Before we go on, tell me this. When everything escalates beyond what you expected, do you act immediately, or do you disappear for a while? I didn't drive home right away. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even open my phone. I just sat there, engine off, hands still. Because for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't planning. I was recalibrating. There's a difference. Planning is action. Recalibrating is survival. Ethan stood outside the car for a moment before leaning down toward the window. We need to move carefully now. I nodded. No argument. No urgency. Just agreement. Because he was right. Everything had changed. Up until today, this was controlled, contained, predictable. Now it wasn't. Now there were other players, bigger ones. Ones who didn't care about family or truth or fairness. Only outcome. I finally started the engine. The headlights cut across the vineyard rows. For a second, the land looked exactly the same. Quiet, still, unbothered. That's the illusion. Because underneath, everything had shifted. I drove. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Ethan followed in his own car. No more talking, no more strategy. Silence. That was the decision. And silence is dangerous in a different way, because it gives the other side space to move. The next morning, at 6:15 a.m., I didn't go to the vineyard. That alone would have surprised anyone who knew me. Routine is identity, and I broke mine. Instead, I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment. No decorations, no distractions. Just the folder in front of me, the one from Richard's office. I hadn't opened it again since we left. Not because I was afraid, because I needed distance, clarity. I made coffee, black, sat down, and opened it. Slowly this time, not scanning, studying. Every page, every clause, every name. That's when I saw something I had missed. Not a number, not a signature, a timeline buried in the agreement. Projected execution date, 30 days. My stomach tightened. That was soon. Too soon. Which meant everything Richard had been doing, the wedding, the announcement, the pressure, it wasn't random. It was scheduled, and I had interrupted it, right before completion, which meant now everyone involved was going to feel it. And when people feel pressure like that, they don't stay passive. They act. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and then I did something I hadn't done in 18 months. Nothing. No calls, no messages, no updates. I disappeared, intentionally. By 9 a.m., my phone had 6 missed calls, 2 from unknown numbers, 1 from Vanessa, 3 from Ethan. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because reacting immediately would put me back into their rhythm, and I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was resetting the board. At 11:30 a.m., there was a knock on my door. 3 times. Firm, not aggressive, but not casual either. I didn't move right away. I waited. Counted. 1, 2, 3. Then I stood, walked to the door, opened it. Vanessa stood there. Not dressed like yesterday. No makeup. Hair tied back. She looked smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. "Can I come in?" No attitude, no control, just asking. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looked around, took in the space. "This is where you live?" Not judgment, just realization. I didn't answer. She sat down at the table, the same table where I had just been going through the documents. Her eyes landed on the folder. Is that everything?" I sat across from her. "Not everything." She nodded slowly, like she expected that. Silence stretched between us. Different from before. Not tension, not conflict, just truth settling in. Then she said something I didn't expect. "He's not stopping." I studied her. "What do you mean?" She looked at me, direct, clear. "For the first time honest, he made 3 calls last night after you left." My body went still. "To who?" She hesitated, then answered. I only recognized one name. I didn't speak, didn't interrupt. Let her continue. Martin Hale. That name. It hit differently, because I knew it. Everyone in that world did. Land development, private acquisitions. The kind of man who doesn't show up unless something is already in motion, and doesn't leave empty-handed. Vanessa continued. He wasn't asking for help. Her voice dropped slightly. He was asking for time. Time. That word again. I leaned forward slightly. "And what did they say?" She shook her head. "I don't know." But he didn't sound worried. Of course he didn't, because people like Richard don't panic. They pivot. And now, he wasn't just defending himself. He was buying time. For something else. Something we hadn't seen yet. Vanessa looked at me. "What are you going to do?" That question, simple but heavy. Because now, this wasn't just about me anymore. Not really. It was about what came next, and what I chose to do with what I knew. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't fully know yet. Not the full plan, not the full move. But I did know one thing. Silence was only temporary, and timing still mattered more than anything. I met her eyes. "I'm going to wait." She frowned slightly. "Wait for what?" I leaned back. For them to make a mistake. Because they would. People always do. Especially when they think they're still in control. Vanessa studied me for a moment, then nodded, slowly, like she was starting to understand. Not just what was happening, but how I was thinking. And that was new. Because for the first time, she wasn't looking down at me. She was trying to keep up. Before she left, she stopped at the door, turned back. "If you're wrong," her voice was steady now, "we lose everything." I held her gaze. "If I'm right, they already have." She didn't respond. She just nodded once and walked out. The door closed quietly behind her. I stood there for a few seconds, then walked back to the table. looked at the folder again, at the timeline, at the names, at the pieces I hadn't connected yet. Because I could feel it. Something was coming. Not from Richard alone, from the people behind him. The ones who didn't show up at weddings or family dinners. The ones who moved things quietly and made problems disappear. So here's what I need you to think about if the people you're up against aren't just dishonest, but powerful. Do you keep playing smart, or do you start playing dangerous? Because what happened next wasn't planned, it wasn't controlled, and it forced me out of silence faster than I expected. At 6:02 a.m., 2 days after the wedding, I received an email with no subject line and a single attachment labeled audit_draft_V3. By 6:05, I realized someone on the inside had just handed me the leverage I didn't know I needed. If you've ever been given a piece of information that feels like both a gift and a trap, stay with me. And tell me this, when someone helps you at the exact right moment, do you trust it? Or do you question, why now? I didn't open it immediately. That's the first rule. Timing matters, but so does distance. I made coffee, sat down, let the file sit in my inbox for exactly 3 minutes. Then I opened it. 47 pages, financial audit summary, Redwood Basin Holdings. My eyes moved faster than usual. Not because I was rushing, because I knew what I was looking for now. Patterns, gaps, connections. And then I saw it. Line 12, consulting disbursement, Carrington Development Group. Amount, $1,240,000. My chest tightened. That wasn't future money. That was already paid. I kept reading. Multiple disbursements, staggered, hidden under different categories. Total confirmed transfer, $2.3 million. Before the deal was even signed. I leaned back slowly. This wasn't just a pending agreement. This was a pre-funded arrangement, which meant Redwood Basin wasn't waiting for ownership to clear. They were investing early, taking risk. That only happens when the return is guaranteed, or when the pressure to secure the asset is high enough. I scrolled to the last page, and there it was. Internal note. Short, clean, cold. If ownership dispute escalates, initiate alternative acquisition strategy. Alternative acquisition. I stared at those 2 words, because they didn't mean legal. They didn't mean negotiation. They meant something else, something quieter, something faster. My phone buzzed. Ethan. I answered this time. You saw it? His voice was already tight. Yes. Pause. Then, we need to move now. There was no hesitation in his tone anymore, no calm pacing. This was different. Why? I asked. Because. He exhaled. They're not waiting for the court anymore. That confirmed it. The email wasn't random. It was a warning, or a signal, or both. Who sent this? I asked. He didn't answer immediately, which told me he knew, or at least suspected. Someone on Redwood's internal team, he said finally. That didn't make me feel better, because people don't leak documents like this without a reason, or a risk. And risk means urgency. I closed the file. What's the move? Ethan didn't hesitate. We secure everything before they do. Everything. That word again. But this time it meant something very specific. Documents, records, proof, and more importantly, control. I grabbed my jacket. I'm heading to the county office. Good, he said. I'll meet you there. The drive felt different, faster, not because I was speeding, because my mind had already moved ahead, connecting pieces, projecting outcomes. If Redwood was preparing an alternative acquisition, that meant they were ready to bypass the legal fight, which meant pressure, leverage, or something worse. At 7:10 a.m., I pulled into the county records office. Small building, brick, quiet. The kind of place people ignore until it matters. Ethan was already there, standing outside, phone in hand. You're early, I said. He shook his head. They are too. I followed his gaze. Across the street, black SUV, engine running, windows tinted, not local, not casual. I felt it immediately, that shift. The one where things stop being theoretical and start becoming real. They're here for the same reason, I said. Ethan nodded. Which means we're already behind. No panic, just fact. We walked inside, fast, not rushed. There's a difference. Inside, the clerk looked up. Routine, normal, that illusion again. We need certified copies of all property records tied to Carrington Estates, Ethan said. Immediate processing. The clerk blinked. That'll take today? His tone didn't rise, but it didn't leave room for delay either. She nodded, typed, printed forms. The machine started moving. Behind us, the door opened. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. You can feel when the room changes. 2 men, heavy steps, measured, not loud, not quiet, intentional. Ethan leaned slightly closer. Don't engage. I nodded. Already understood. This wasn't the place. This wasn't the moment. We stayed focused. Documents, requests, signatures, time. That's what mattered. Minutes passed, felt longer. Finally, the clerk handed over the first set. Stamped, certified, real, control. I took them, held them steady, because this was protection. Legal, structured, harder to move around. We turned to leave, and that's when one of them spoke. You're moving fast. His voice was calm, too calm. I didn't respond, kept walking. Ethan stayed beside me, silent. We reached the door, almost out. Then he said one more thing. This doesn't have to get complicated. I stopped. Just for a second, not turning, just enough. Because statements like that, they're not advice. They're offers, or warnings. I answered without looking back. It already is. Then I walked out, didn't slow down, didn't pause, got into the car, closed the door. Only then did I breathe. Ethan got in beside me. That was them, he said. Redwood. I nodded. Already knew. Because now, this wasn't hidden anymore. They weren't waiting in the background. They were stepping in, directly. Which meant one thing. The timeline had just accelerated. I looked down at the documents in my hands. Certified, stamped, real. But suddenly, they felt smaller compared to what we were up against. So let me ask you this. If the people you're fighting stop staying behind the scenes and start showing up in person, do you keep playing by the rules, or do you change the way you fight? Because what I did next wasn't something I had planned, and it pushed everything closer to the edge. Faster than anyone expected, at 8:26 a.m., with certified records still warm in my hands and 2 men from Redwood Basin watching from across the street, I made a decision that didn't involve a courtroom. By 8:31, I was no longer just defending my claim. I was building a case they couldn't outrun. If you've ever realized rules only protect you when the other side follows them too, you know this moment. Tell me this, when the fight stops being fair, do you keep playing clean, or do you change the game? I didn't start the engine right away. I looked at the documents again. Property deeds, historical filings, trust references, everything we needed to prove ownership. But proof and protection are not the same thing. Ethan watched me. You're thinking something. I nodded slowly. We're playing defense. He didn't argue. Because it was true. Everything we'd done so far was reactive. Block the deal, expose the fraud, secure the records. But Redwood wasn't reacting. They were advancing. And if we stayed in that position, we would always be one step behind. I turned to him. We need to force this into the open. His eyes narrowed slightly. Public. Yes. That word changed the air inside the car. Public means pressure. Public means visibility. Public means risk for everyone involved, including them. They won't like that, Ethan said. Exactly, I replied. Because people like Redwood operate in shadows. They negotiate quietly. They resolve things before anyone notices. What they don't do is handle attention. I pulled out my phone, opened the audit file again, scrolled to the transfers. $3 million. Pre-deal. Unreported. Unsecured. That wasn't just leverage. That was exposure. Financial, legal, reputational. All at once. Ethan watched me. What are you planning? I looked at him. We don't wait for court. We bring it to them first. He leaned back slightly, thinking, calculating. Then you're talking about escalation. Yes, and I meant it. Not emotionally, strategically. Because once something becomes public, it stops being controllable. For everyone, even me. That's the cost. I dialed a number. Not a lawyer, not the police. Someone else. She answered on the third ring. This is Claire Bennett. Her voice was sharp, professional. Claire Bennett, investigative journalist, regional business and land acquisitions. The kind of person who notices patterns others ignore. Claire. I said I have something you'll want to see. Pause. Then, what kind of something? The kind that connects a private acquisition firm to a forged trust and a blocked multi-million-dollar land deal. Silence. Then, where are you? I gave her the location. 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. Ethan looked at me. That's one way to do it. I didn't smile, because this wasn't clever. This was necessary. 22 minutes later, Claire arrived. No assistant, no camera crew, just a notebook and eyes that didn't miss anything. She stepped up to the car. You're Lila, I nodded. You brought proof. I handed her the first document. She didn't react immediately. She read, then the second, then the audit file on my phone. Her expression didn't change much, but her questions did. Who else knows? Just us, for now. She nodded. Good, that meant something. Then she asked the real question. Why give this to me? I held her gaze. Because they're not waiting for the court, and I'm not waiting for them. She studied me for a second longer, then closed her notebook. This goes public. Everything changes. I nodded. I know. That's the point. She exhaled slowly. All right. Her tone shifted, more focused, more engaged. I'll need copies, full documentation, timeline. You'll have it, I said, and I meant it. Because now, this wasn't just a legal case. It was a story, and stories move faster than lawsuits. Claire looked between me and Ethan. You're going to get pressure for this. I didn't respond, because that wasn't new. That had already started. She gave a small nod. Then I'll move fast. And just like that, she was gone. Back into her car, already dialing someone, already building something bigger. Ethan watched her leave. No going back now. I looked down at the documents again. No, there wasn't. Across the street, the black SUV was still there. But now, the energy had shifted. They weren't just observing anymore. They were waiting. I started the engine. We need to secure the rest, I said. What else is there? Ethan asked. I met his eyes. Everything they don't think we have. Because if Redwood had internal leaks, then there were more documents, more connections, more proof, and I intended to find it before they could shut it down. By noon, Claire had already texted. Working on verification. This is bigger than local. Bigger than local. That confirmed it. This wasn't just a vineyard, or even just Redwood. This was networked, layered, connected, and now exposed. I leaned back in my seat for a moment, closed my eyes, just for a second, because this was the point of no return. Not the wedding, not the confrontation. This, the moment where private becomes public, and everything accelerates. So let me ask you this. If you had one chance to force the truth into the light, knowing it would bring consequences you couldn't fully control. Would you still do it? Because what happened next didn't just pressure Richard. It didn't just shake Redwood. It pulled in people who were never supposed to be part of this. And once they stepped in, there was no slowing it down, only surviving what came after. At 3:42 p.m., less than 7 hours after I handed Claire Bennett the files, the first headline went live. By 3:49, my phone lit up with 27 notifications. By 4:03, Richard Carrington called me for the first time in my life. If you've ever pushed something into the open and watched it spread faster than you expected, you know this moment. Tell me this. When the truth finally surfaces, do you feel relief, or do you brace for what comes next? The headline was simple. Too simple. Local developer tied to disputed land ownership and undisclosed payments. No names in the title, but inside, everything was there. Carrington Development Group, Redwood Basin Holdings, Unverified Trust Amendment, preliminary financial transfers exceeding $2 million. Claire didn't exaggerate. She didn't need to. Facts, presented clean, hit harder than speculation. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Local forums, business blogs, regional news feeds. People started connecting dots. And once people start doing that, you don't control the narrative anymore. It controls itself. My phone kept vibrating. Unknown numbers, messages, emails. Ethan called. I answered. "It's moving fast," he said. I glanced at the screen again. "Faster than I expected." "Good." His tone was sharp now. "This puts pressure on Redwood. And pressure creates mistakes." That word again. Mistakes. The thing I had been waiting for. Across the street from my apartment, I noticed a car I hadn't seen before. Dark. Parked. Engine off. Maybe nothing. Maybe not. "You're not safe staying visible right now," Ethan said. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. Because going public doesn't just expose them. It exposes you. I grabbed my keys. "I'm not staying here." "Good." He said, "Send me your location when you move." I ended the call. Moved quickly, not rushed, focused. Packed only what mattered. Documents, laptop, phone charger. Everything else, replaceable. That's another thing you learn. When things escalate, you don't hold on to objects. You hold on to leverage. I stepped outside. The air felt different, heavier, like the world had noticed something shift. I got into the car, drove. No fixed destination at first, just distance. Then I chose one. A small motel 40 minutes out. Not because it was safe, because it was forgettable. And sometimes, that's better. By 5:10 p.m., I was inside. Door locked, curtains closed, phone on silent. Then I checked the updates. More articles, more coverage. One of them had names now, full names. Richard Carrington, Redwood Basin Holdings, the number 2. 3 million was everywhere. And then, the next development, Claire texted. "They're responding." I called her immediately. "What kind of response?" Pause. Then, "They're denying everything." Of course they were. Stage 1 again, but public this time. Different stakes, different consequences. "Anyone else?" I asked. She hesitated slightly. Then, yes. That one word carried weight. "Who?" A new voice cut in. "That would be us." I froze. Not physically, internally. Claire's line had merged. Or been intercepted. I couldn't tell. "Who is this?" I asked. Calm, controlled. Because panic gives away power. A brief pause. Then, Martin Hale. There it was. The name Vanessa had mentioned. Now, on the line. Direct, no filter, no distance. Ethan had warned me. This was bigger. Now it was here, Mr. Hale, I said, even tone. "You move quickly." "So do you," he replied. No emotion, just acknowledgement. I didn't speak. Let him continue. "What you've done has created unnecessary complications." Unnecessary? I almost smiled, but I didn't. Because this wasn't the moment. I answered simply, I disagree. A pause. Longer this time. He adjusted. I can make this go away. There it was, the offer. Clean, direct, predictable. I leaned back in the chair, eyes on the closed curtains. No, I said. No. Hesitation. No explanation. Silence. Then you should reconsider. His voice hadn't changed, still calm, still measured, which made it more dangerous. Because men like him don't threaten loudly. They imply quietly. I kept my tone even. You should have done this legally. Another pause. Then a slight shift. First crack. You're interfering in something larger than you understand. That was the closest he came to emotion, not anger. Warning. I answered with one sentence. If it's built on fraud, it deserves to be interrupted. Silence again. Longer now. Then we'll be in touch. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a few seconds, then set it down slowly. Claire spoke again. You okay? I exhaled once. Yes. That wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. She continued. This just got bigger. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I know. We ended the call, and for the first time since the article went live, the room felt quiet again. But not calm, not safe, just waiting. I sat there, thinking, replaying every word, every detail. Because conversations like that, they're never just conversations. They're positioning. And Martin Hale had just shown his hand. Offer, warning, exit. Which meant next would be action, not words. I looked down at the documents on the table. The trust, the audit, the agreements, everything that had brought me here. And I realized something. This was no longer just exposure. It was confrontation. Public, direct, unavoidable. So let me ask you, if the people you're up against stop hiding and start speaking to you directly, do you hold your ground or do you prepare for impact? Because what happened next didn't come through a phone call or a headline. It came in a way I couldn't ignore, and it forced me to make a choice faster than I was ready for. At 2 p.m., less than 24 hours after the article broke, I walked into a room with 43 people who all knew my name, and none of them were on my side. By 2:07, Richard Carrington finally stopped denying everything. If you've ever had to face people who thought power would protect them, stay with me. And tell me this, when the truth is already out, do you still need to prove it? Or do you just need to let them reveal themselves? The meeting wasn't public, not technically, but it might as well have been. County Administrative Building, 3rd floor, Conference Room B. That's where they told me to come. Not requested, told. Ethan didn't like it. This is a pressure room, he said before we went in. I nodded. I know, which is exactly why I agreed. Because pressure reveals things, and I needed them to reveal everything. When we walked in, the room was already full. Richard sat at the far end of the table, not alone. 2 attorneys beside him. Across from him, Martin Hale. In person now, mid-50s. Calm, still, the kind of man who doesn't move unless it matters. And around them, county officials, legal advisors, 2 representatives I recognized from Redwood, and 3 people I didn't know, but didn't need to, because you can tell who holds influence without introductions. Every seat filled, except 2, ours. I didn't hesitate. I walked in, sat down, placed the folder on the table, hands still, posture steady, no performance, no reaction. That alone shifted the room slightly, because they expected something else. Nervous, defensive, emotional. I gave them none of that. The meeting started without formalities. Martin spoke first. Miss Moreno, his tone controlled, measured. We're here to resolve this efficiently. Efficiently. Interesting word. I didn't respond. Let him continue. There are disputes regarding documentation, ownership, and financial activity. Disputes. Still trying to soften it, still trying to control the language, I slid one document forward, the original trust. There's no dispute about ownership. Silence. Small, but noticeable. Richard shifted slightly. First sign of discomfort. Martin didn't look at the paper. Not yet. Instead, "You've escalated this publicly. That carries consequences." I met his eyes. "So does fraud." There it was, the word again. This time inside a controlled room. Not a headline, not a rumor. Direct Martin finally looked down at the document. Then at Ethan, then back at me. "You've made your position clear. Now we need to discuss resolution." Resolution, another word that hides meaning. I leaned forward slightly. "What kind of resolution?" He answered immediately. "You withdraw the claims, we compensate you." Compensate. There it was, the offer. Structured, official, expected. I didn't ask how much, because that's not how this works. Instead, I asked, "And the fraud?" He paused, brief, controlled. We move forward. No admission, no accountability. Just forward. I shook my head slightly. No, simple, final. Richard spoke then. First time. His voice sharper now. "You're making a mistake." I turned to him. Calm. "I've heard that before." He leaned forward, more aggressive. "You think this ends well for you?" I held his gaze. "It already has." That landed. Because it was true. The exposure, the documents, the control. He couldn't undo that. Martin raised a hand, slightly. Not to stop him, to reset the room. "Miss Moreno?" His tone shifted, colder now, more direct. "You're interfering with the structured acquisition backed by multiple parties." I didn't respond immediately. Let the weight of that sit. Then, "If it requires forgery, it shouldn't exist." Silence. Longer this time. Because now, they were running out of language. No more soft words. No more reframing. Just facts. One of the county officials spoke. "We need to address the legal standing of that trust." Ethan stepped in clear, precise. "Already established, irrevocable, filed, verified. No ambiguity." The official nodded slowly. That mattered, because once neutral parties acknowledge something, it becomes harder to challenge. Martin leaned back slightly, first sign of adjustment. Then, he changed tactics. "What if we restructure the deal?" There it was. Pivot. Not deny, not dismiss, adapt. I stayed still, listening. "We proceed with development. You retain partial ownership. Revenue. Share. Significant compensation." He placed the offer carefully, like a chess move, measured, strategic. For most people, that would be tempting. Money, security, recognition. But this was never about that. I answered with one sentence. "I'm not interested in partnering with people who tried to erase me." Silence. Heavy, final. That was the second line, clear-cut, unmovable. Richard lost patience. Finally, the shift I had been waiting for. "This is ridiculous!" His voice rose. Not loud, but sharp. "You had nothing before I stepped in." There it was. Blame. Stage 2. I let him speak. Didn't interrupt. Let him build it. "Everything you have came from me." Stage 3. Forming. Victim and justification mixing. I tilted my head slightly and said one sentence. "You took something that wasn't yours and called it generosity." That was it. That was the line. Short, sharp, unavoidable. The room went quiet, because statements like that don't need explanation. They expose everything in one moment. Richard opened his mouth, then stopped, because there was nothing left to say. Martin looked at him. Not supportive, not defensive. Assessing. That's when I knew. he was already distancing. Because in rooms like this, people don't stay loyal. They stay aligned with outcomes. And Richard was no longer a good outcome. The meeting shifted again, subtly but completely. One of the Redwood representatives spoke. "We'll need to reassess our position." There it was. Not withdrawal, not yet, but movement. Away from him. Ethan leaned slightly toward me. Quiet. "It's breaking." I nodded, because I could feel it too. That moment, where everything starts to separate, and once it does, it doesn't come back together. Martin stood. Meeting's over. No announcement, no resolution. Just decision. People started standing, gathering papers, leaving. Not rushed, not chaotic. Just done. Richard stayed seated for a few seconds longer, then stood, slowly. He looked at me, not angry anymore, not confident either. Something else. Recognition. "Too late, you could have had everything." He said. I met his eyes. "I already do." That was the third line. Simple, final, complete. He didn't respond, he just turned and walked out. And just like that, it was over. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I stayed seated for a moment, then stood, collected the documents, walked out with Ethan. The hallway felt different, lighter, like something had released. We stepped outside, into the afternoon light. Ethan exhaled. "That's it." I nodded. "Yes. But here's the thing. Winning like that, it doesn't feel loud. It doesn't feel explosive. It feels quiet, like something finally aligning. But before everything settled, there was still one piece left, one final outcome that hadn't played out yet. And when it did, it didn't come from Richard or Martin. It came from somewhere else entirely. So let me ask you, when everything finally turns in your favor, do you celebrate? Or do you wait to see what comes after? Because what happened next wasn't about them anymore. It was about what I chose to do with everything I had taken back. 3 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning at 8:14 a.m., I stood alone in the vineyard as the fog lifted off the rows and the land finally felt like mine. Not controlled, not contested, mine. If you've ever fought for something that took years to reclaim, you know this feeling. And before I finish, tell me this. When everything is finally yours again, do you go back to who you were, or do you become someone new? The headlines faded faster than I expected. That's the thing about public attention. It burns bright, then moves on. But consequences? Those stay. Redwood Basin Holdings officially withdrew from the deal 12 days after the meeting. No statement, no apology, just silence. The kind that says, "We were never here." The county froze all development proposals tied to Carrington Estates, pending final court confirmation. That part took time. Legal always does. But the direction was clear. Ownership restored. Richard Carrington didn't disappear. People like him don't. But he changed. His name started showing up in different places. Not features, not profiles. Records, civil filings, investigations, quiet inquiries into financial activity. The kind that don't make headlines, but follow you everywhere. Vanessa. I didn't hear from her for a while. Then, one afternoon, a message. Just one line. "I understand now." No blame, no defense. Just understanding. I didn't respond immediately, because not every door needs to be opened right away. Some you leave unlocked and decide later. Ethan finalized the legal side over the next month. The trust was reaffirmed, the amendment voided, the financial discrepancies flagged for further review. Clean, structured final. When he handed me the last set of documents, he didn't say congratulations. He just said, "It's yours." Simple, like it should have been from the beginning. I walked the land differently after that. Not checking, not maintaining. Walking. There's a difference. When something belongs to you, you don't rush through it. You take your time. I stopped near the center row, the same place I used to stand when I was invisible. And I realized something. I didn't want to run it the way Richard had. Not as a transaction, not as an asset. Something else, something quieter, something real. I scaled everything back first. No expansion, no aggressive development, just restoration. Soil, vines, structure. The parts that had been ignored, while money moved somewhere else. I hired 3 people, local, experienced, not flashy, reliable. We rebuilt slowly, deliberately, no rush, because growth, done right, doesn't need pressure. 2 months later, the vineyard reopened, not as Carrington Estates, as Moreno Fields. I had the sign made myself, wood simple. No gold, no branding, just a name. My name. That was enough. The first weekend people came, not because of the story, because of the product. That mattered more. Always Claire came by once, notebook in hand, but she didn't write anything. She just walked the rows, looked around, then said one sentence. You didn't just expose it, you changed it. I didn't answer, because I hadn't thought of it that way. But she was. Right. Exposure is one thing. What you do after, that's the real outcome. A month later, I met Vanessa. Not planned, not dramatic. A small coffee shop, neutral ground. She looked different, simpler. No performance, no audience, just present. We sat across from each other. No tension, just space. I was wrong, she said. Direct, no hesitation. I nodded, not as victory, just acknowledgement. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. I didn't see it, not until it was too late. I answered, honestly, you didn't want to. She didn't argue, because that was true too. We talked for 20 minutes, not about the past, not about blame, just forward. Before we left, she said something that stayed with me. What you did? I couldn't have done that. I shook my head slightly. You didn't have to. That was the difference. Not everyone has the same role in a story. Some people build, some people take, some people stop it. That was mine. As for Richard, I saw him once more, from a distance, at a courthouse he didn't approach, didn't speak, just looked. And for the first time, there was no calculation in his eyes, no strategy, just consequence. Then he turned and walked away. And that was enough. Because closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from absence. That evening I sat on the porch, alone. No noise, no pressure. Just the sound of wind moving through the vines. The same land, the same rows. But everything felt different. Not because it changed, because I did. I wasn't the girl standing at the edge of a room anymore, waiting to be seen. I was the one who walked out, built something, and came back on my own terms. So here's what I'll leave you with. You don't win by reacting. You win by understanding, by waiting, by choosing your moment. And when that moment comes, you don't hesitate. You act. Clean, precise, final. My name is Lila Moreno. This land is mine, and no one gets to rewrite that again. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're watching from, and whether you would have waited or acted sooner. Because the next story might not be about land. It might be about something even harder to take back. And I'll see you there.